Nightingale sprinted into the castle. She dissolved into the mist, swiftly running into the meeting hall, her heart sinking instantly. The meeting hall was in utter chaos, with the nobles seemingly greatly shocked, all congregated against the walls, whispering amongst themselves. The guards were sealing off the scene. The high table, which should have been occupied by Prince Roland, was empty. A man lay on the floor. Due to the stone of God punishment he was wearing, Nightingale could not see the man's face. For a moment, she felt her entire world turned upside down. She emerged from the mist, and the scenes before her eyes regained color. It was then she saw that the man on the ground was not Roland, but a guard she had never seen before. He was wearing the formal attire of the Petrov family, with a dark red patch on his chest that looked like a gunshot wound. A familiar voice sounded beside her, calling her name. She turned her head, and the speaker was Roland, who was encircled by several guards in a corner of the hall. Nightingale opened her mouth, yet no words escaped her, her body weakened as if she had survived a catastrophe. At this moment, all she wanted to do was to hug Roland tightly. She got into the mist, passed through the guards, and hugged Roland tightly. Her arms clung tightly to the prince's back, her head buried in his chest, listening to his heartbeat, as if only by doing so could it prove that everything was merely a false alarm. Roland also seemed to realize something, clapped his hands towards the nobles, apologizing for the turmoil, and told everyone to proceed to lunch and enjoy their meal, with the meeting to continue in the afternoon. Back in the office, Roland asked Nightingale if the murderer was related to this assassination attempt. Nightingale, her emotions gradually stabilizing, responded affirmatively. When she found out that the person behind the criminal was a guard of the Petrovs family, she immediately rushed over. Roland sighed, reflecting on the fact that the assassin, who had managed to plan to this degree, accounting for both Roland's visit and the witches, was truly wasted just being an assassin. Petrov immediately knelt on one knee before the prince. Roland told him to rise, for he did not like to impose blame unnecessarily. However, looking at Petrov, he did recognize that there was also wrongdoing on his part. The castle staffing and perimeter security had lapsed, marking his negligence. Petrov opened his mouth, attempting to explain, but eventually lowered his head, admitting his guilt. Roland instructed Petrov to investigate the assassin's identity. Petrov promptly departed to gather information about the individual. Only after he had left, did Nightingale voice her deep worries, asking what had actually happened. Roland smiled, crediting Sylvie's warning for averting disaster. After hearing the prince's recount, she understood the assassination attempt, but, in reality, it was not as casual as he described. Although weapons were prohibited in the hall, the enemy had hidden a short dagger in his clothes. Plus, being a genuine castle guard, no one performed a search on him, allowing him direct entry into the hall. The only mistake was that he was wearing the stone of God punishment. While it was normal for the perimeter guards to wear the stone, it became unusually conspicuous inside the hall. To avoid disturbing Sylvie's observations, all attending nobles were required to remove their god stone accessories. The sudden appearance of a black void immediately caught Sylvie's attention, and she issued a warning as the assassin approached the prince. What followed, while casually narrated by Roland, left Nightingale shocked. From the moment the enemy heard the warning, his approach was only a few short seconds. The prince had just drawn his revolver and flicked the safety off when the dagger was already thrust towards him. Fortunately, Roland, wearing protective gear crafted by Soraya, found that the dagger could not penetrate the coating, allowing him the opportunity to shoot at the assassin. 2 bullets took the assassin's life instantly. Nightingale was vividly aware of how perilous the process was and considered what might have happened if, in panic, Roland hadn't switched off the safety or if the gun hadn't fired successfully. She turned her head, her gaze sharply sweeping over Lightning, whose head sagged guiltily in a genuine expression of a terrible mistake. The little girl was terrified and continuously apologized, vowing never to leave Roland's side again. Nightingale insisted Roland must punish them when Nightingale was not around. Lightning and Maisie should stay by Roland's side to protect him from enemies. For instance, in today's situation, if Lightning had flown Roland up, the assassin would have had no chance to harm him. Roland smiled and did not blame Lightning and wanted to plead on her behalf. With tear-streaked cheeks, Lightning listened to Nightingale insisting that they must be punished this time. If Scroll and Wendy were here, they'd agree with her thoughts. If they did not genuinely feel their mistakes, what would they do if a real incident occurred next time? The prince stroked his chin in thought, then looked to Nightingale, proposing a punishment of confining them to their room, not allowing them to leave until they finished 3 sets of comprehensive exercises in mathematics and science. Upon hearing this, Lightning seemed petrified. Nightingale couldn't help but inhale sharply, feeling that the punishment of 3 sets of comprehensive exercises in mathematics and science was truly horrifying. Nonetheless, realizing it was her initial proposal, she couldn't retract it now and sternly nodded her head. Sylvie, supporting a petrified and despondent little girl, left the office. After everyone had left, Nightingale spoke, expressing that she hadn't protected Roland properly. Roland shook his head, telling her that she did well. Why did the assassin choose to act in the meeting hall? Because he understood that Roland had a witch protecting him, and this witch was extremely powerful. Without drawing her away, there was no chance whatsoever. The more arrangements made, the more flaws could be exposed, so in the end, he could only launch an attack with a small dagger. Nightingale replied that he had almost succeeded, nonetheless. Roland smiled, stating that it wasn't a success unless he killed him. He looked at Nightingale and asked her, without her, what would he have done? Patiently wait for an opportunity sufficient to launch a fatal attack. So long as someone was lurking in the castle, such an opportunity would always exist. Therefore, Nightingale had protected him very well. Roland did not console Nightingale, this was his genuine thought, which made her feel a warm surge from within, dispelling most of her originally uneasy self-blame. Petrov returned to the office in the evening, revealing that the assassin was named Theo, a former guard of Duke Ryan. According to Nightingale and Petrov's speculations, this assassination didn't seem to be executed in revenge for the Duke. Theo's residence had been sealed off, and Summer would use her abilities to ascertain the true reasons, thus, Spear was also called to the castle. Sitting on Maisie's back, Spear felt a bit uncomfortable, continuously saying, "Slow, slow." Maisie, hearing the word slow, thought Spear thought it was too slow and so accelerated. Only upon reaching the stronghold did Spear finally take a breath, clarifying that she meant to say a bit slower. In the evening, Roland arrived at Theo's residence, where the room was empty. Clearly, all evidence had been destroyed before the assassin acted. Summer then began to recreate the events of these past few nights. Spear subsequently linked Summer's and Maisie's magic power, and Summer, temporarily possessing ample magical power, began to backtrack through the detailed events of each night. Theo was sometimes seen sitting by the fireplace in deep thought, sometimes writing something, all of which was recorded in a drawing by Soraya. According to the passage of time, this time, a ring appeared on the table. Roland's voice sounded somewhat astonished as he urged Soraya to draw the ring. The ring was quickly drawn by the magic pen. It was about thumb-sized, the main body around gemstone-shaped, engraved on both sides with the tower and spear emblem, a typical Grey Castle royal crest. Nightingale questioned, was he one of Timothy's men? Roland pondered for a while before shaking his head after a long pause, stating it was a token of Wimbledon III, that is, Roland's father. Everyone was taken aback, because they had heard that Wimbledon III had been killed by Gerald, the first prince of Grey Castle. Roland recalled his father showing him the ring when he was a child. His father told him that each gemstone represented a warrior loyal to the royal family, and the more gemstones, the more stable the throne of the Wimbledon line. Roland sighed. It seemed Theo was a hidden piece placed by Wimbledon III beside Duke Ryan to monitor the entire Western Territory's movements. Ron asked why Theo would attack Roland. Roland thought it was probably because Timothy found the list and passed down the assassination order. For them, the emblem meant everything, they would carry out any order, no matter what it was. Nightingale watched the scene. Theo stared at the ring for a long time, eventually throwing the ring into the fireplace with a somewhat disappointed yet slightly relieved expression. Perhaps in Theo's eyes, finishing this order also meant freedom. However, Roland, who had figured out the reason, did not show a relaxed expression but gazed seriously at the fireplace, and Theo did not take his eyes off it for a long time. During midnight, Nightingale quietly snuck into Roland's room. Nightingale hadn't visited Roland in the middle of the night for a long time, but today's assassination left her emotionally unsettled, and without Wendy and Anna, the castle also provided her with less restraint. Gazing at the sleeping prince, she stepped out of the mist, quietly walked to the side of the bed, and gently kissed his forehead. Then, she lay down beside Roland. When Roland got up from bed, it was already broad daylight. He thought he must have been exhausted from yesterday, as his arm was still a bit sore. He saw a fried egg and 2 pancakes, along with a cup of tea, beside the table. Just like back in the border town, it was clearly prepared by Nightingale. Roland said thank you to Nightingale towards the empty lounge chair. Nightingale's figure gradually emerged. Roland smiled. Nightingale would always lie down if she could avoid sitting. With a flicker, she flipped and sat on the bed, saying she also liked it here. He smiled at Nightingale, saw that she was in a good mood, and asked if she had a good dream. Nightingale thought for a moment and then said that indeed, it was a nice dream. Today, he hoped Nightingale would stay by his side. Thinking back, if Timothy really got the list, perhaps there are other people who got the order too. These men were unwaveringly loyal to the royal family, brave and intelligent, as they should not be wasted on assassinations. Those people should be placed in more promising positions because they were all heroes of the country. Nightingale smiled and said, "As you wish, Your Highness." Roland opens the curtains, ready to first visit the mines and salt wells. Nightingale, Petrov, and Roland arrived at a mining area. The man leading them is named Denver. His family has lived around this mountain for generations. Moreover, one of his ancestors was the one who initially discovered this mine. He seems very proud of this mine. Even when facing the Prince of Grey Castle, he speaks eloquently. When asked why the mine has yet to be exploited, Denver replied that it was because the month of the demons had just ended, melted snow had entered the mountain and was flowing through it. The rate of water collection was too fast, so mining could only wait until the summer. Roland suggested that they should use several steam engines to help pump out the water, but Denver hadn't heard of such a thing. Roland smiled and said it was a machine that would allow the mines to operate in all 4 seasons, and Denver had much to learn in the future. Denver looked somewhat skeptical but didn't say anything. Roland didn't mind and began to move to the next inspection point. Perhaps Denver didn't expect the prince to prepare to leave immediately. He hurriedly stepped forward, took out a small wooden box from his arms and handed it forward, saying it was a small token from his family. Roland, intrigued, accepted the box and opened the lid. Inside lay 2 dazzling gems, the light from the torches causing them to refract a mingling of red and green, brilliant enough to almost dazzle the eye. He was momentarily stunned. None of Denver's words hit his ears, as his attention was entirely focused on the gems. Their gleam was all too familiar, and even with his lack of knowledge about minerals, he had heard of this kind of stone. There was another, more common name back on Earth, diaspora. However, what excited him was not the gem itself. After a long while, the prince closed the wooden box and excitedly asked about the remnants dug out from the mine. Denver said all the waste was transported to the foot of the mountain. Denver didn't quite understand the implication of the prince's question and explained that they had carefully sifted through those minerals, which were either of too poor quality or had shattered during the mining process, making them unsuitable to be polished into gems. Roland smiled and shook his head, telling Denver that those things might actually be the real treasures. Denver was immediately stunned. Roland did not explain further, as in this era even steelmaking was already a tough challenge, let alone refining pure aluminum. The main component of diaspora is aluminum oxide. Also, as a byproduct of bauxite, finding it is a strong indication that the area is rich in aluminum elements, and both the soil and rock can be used as raw materials for aluminum smelting. The uses of aluminum are vast. It has a low density, and corrosion resistant, and is an essential key material for future aviation technology. Airships and large-scale weapons could all be possible in the future. It seems that Roland's plans may need some adjustments. The ship slowly approached the pier, and Tilly stepped out of the cabin, seeing the pier was already full of witches coming to greet her. Molly was the first to pounce for a hug. Honey enviously declared she wanted a hug too. Andrea also came for a hug, followed by the other witches. A burst of laughter erupted from the crowd, and seeing the sincere smiles on everyone's faces, Tilly felt the depression that had lingered in her heart for days also dissipate quite a bit. Regardless, this place is her home, a nation built by witches. Camilla, the manager, while Tilly was away, watched Tilly, who was surrounded by everyone, and smiled, saying she would report the situation to Tilly later. The witches were very interested in Border Town, and everyone asked a lot of questions. Tilly responded to everyone's questions and concerns until the witches saw large crates being unloaded, which also contained books. Molly curiously asked what these were. Only witches who had been to Border Town had seen these frightening yet familiar books. Tilly clapped her hands, asking everyone to quiet down momentarily, and announced that this was a gift from Prince Roland to everyone, including manuals for reading and writing, basic mathematics, and science. In simple terms, they were knowledge. Most witches looked puzzled, but Tilly said that this was the only shortcut for everyone to enhance their abilities. Thunder also arrived at the pier, noting that popularizing education is not an easy task to achieve. It requires a substantial investment of money and time, meaning the territory would temporarily lose part of its labor force, and it demands rulers to implement it for a long time. Tilly nodded in agreement, but the change it brought was impressive, not only for ordinary people but even more so for witches. This was something Tilly had witnessed in Border Town. Before going to the Western Territory, she had never imagined that a group of ordinary civilians could also exude such vitality and life. Thunder maintained his usual demeanor, his smile hearty and friendly as he asked Tilly if her trip to the Western Territory had resolved the troubles in her heart. Tilly, shaking her head, hadn't found the answers she sought. Roland, after all, had kept some secrets from Tilly. However, under the current circumstances, those matters seemed to become less significant. The witches discovered a giant panda plush toy in another box. To which Ashes disdainfully remarked that the prince knew how to please Tilly with such gifts. Though other witches looked somewhat envious hearing it was a gift by the prince. Tilly, with a slightly blushing face, told Camilla and Thunder to return to the office to discuss further. Upon returning to the office, the trio began to discuss the information brought back from Border Town. Thunder was utterly astounded when he saw the documents in hand, which contained not only intelligence on demons but also 400-year-old writings from witches and their history. Enthusiastically, Thunder exclaimed that Tilly's western journey brought back more secrets than he had discovered in his entire life of adventuring. Tilly, intrigued, asked Thunder if he was not afraid. With his adventurous heart, Thunder naturally wasn't afraid but instead was inflamed with a burning desire for more exploration. His only thought now was to rush to Border Town to meet that very witch. Tilly was rather bemused. The primary purpose of heading to the Western Territory was to meet Agatha, not her own daughter. She didn't know whether to feel happy or sad for Lightning at this point. Thunder also shared his own discoveries. During his most recent voyage, he returned to the sea line, a cliff made of seawater that divided the sea surface into two planes, but ships could travel freely on it. Even more unbelievably, they witnessed the entire process of a tide rising. This time, the flow speed of the seawater gradually increased, finally rushing to a low point like falling over a cliff. If it hadn't been for Molly's slime servant protecting the ship, it would likely have been broken in half on the spot. They desperately turned the steering wheel. A strong wind blew at that moment, so the ship neither moved forward nor fell off the cliff. Only then did they discover the truth about the tides. Tilly commented that this simply defied logic. Thunder, preferring to trust his own eyes over conventional logic, noted that a couple of weeks later, the tide began to recede, in sync with the ebb and flow timing at the Shadow Isle. They theorized that the water did not vanish but flowed towards the Shadow Isle as if a gigantic hole in the seafloor was devouring the seawater. Of course, these were all Thunder's speculations. After all, no one had ever seen what the actual seabed looked like. But there was one thing he cared about deeply: why was the ocean they were in called the Vortex Sea? Tilly was taken aback when she heard this, and Thunder mysteriously smiled. This name had existed for hundreds of years. Even though ordinary people couldn't see any vortex, it didn't mean witches couldn't. Only when Tilly mentioned the history and witches from 400 years ago did Thunder realize that this name might have been passed down from that era. Tilly nodded, thinking that Thunder made a good point, but they didn't have the ability to investigate further, and neither did the witches of the Slumbering Isle. However, Thunder mentioned he knew one witch who might. This witch was in the fjords and hadn't interacted with humans for a long time. She used to be a good friend of Thunder's adventure crew but bid farewell to the land after awakening as a witch. Her melodious singing could only be heard when fog arose. Tilly should have heard stories about her. Tilly immediately remembered this was the mermaid who guides and helps travelers. Though Thunder was uncertain whether he could get her assistance, perhaps he needed to ask for a favor from his old friend, Margaret. Thunder also asked Tilly to inquire about purchasing ships from Border Town. Those ships didn't require sails, which would be very useful to him. However, he hoped that Lightning wouldn't find out about this matter. Tilly nodded, understanding that Thunder didn't want Lightning to insist on adventuring together. In the city of Neverwinter, at the Changga District dock, 2 concrete ships have moored, and many people are queuing to board. Kay, looking at her 2 friends, asked why they were not staying. Why would they go to a foreign place? Tiger Claw says working in the border town pays more than here. He patted Snake Fong, saying that when they save enough money, they could even buy a bicycle. Snake Fong nodded in agreement, while Kay's gaze fixed on him. Snake Fong agreed with Tiger Claw to earn more in the border town, but his true intent was that it was closer to paper. Roland then gave some instructions to Petrov. Patting Petrov on the shoulder, Roland told him that after he left, the place would be handed over to him, advising him to do well because being the executive officer of the Changga district would not be his end. Petrov bowed, promising not to let His Highness down. Roland boarded the ship, giving the order to set sail. With the ship's horn echoing, it slowly left the shore, heading towards the border town. On the ship, Roland looked at the Changga district. With only 1 week left to the spring offensive, he was at ease with Axe handling the military. For now, the most important thing is agricultural production. As long as they have enough food, everything will be alright. Nightingale mentioned the seeds have improved by Leaf, and with the agriculture minister, the spring planting work will surely go smoothly. In addition to this, the spring offensive has the final highlight to look forward to. Returning to Border Town, Roland immediately headed to the Crimson Water River dockyard with Nightingale. Seeing Roland appear, Anna immediately waved to him. Anna reported her work to Roland. Some things hadn't gone smoothly. There were several troubles like the ship's hull deforming at the side, propeller leakage, the ship tilting to one side after welding the bridge, and the gun mount being unable to lock the cannon, but Anna had already solved them. Roland was quite surprised. Anna blossomed into a bright smile, then began explaining one by one where the problems arose, what caused them, and how she resolved them. The 2 of them looked at Anna, unable to speak for a long time. Anna was truly impressive. Anna asked Roland if the ship had a name. Anna said the First Army soldiers came to see the ship every few days, even vying to carve their names on the bridge. Roland suddenly remembered this matter. Although he had promised that the person with the best artillery skills could have a ship named after them, this ship was an exception. The name of the first warship not only represented the ship itself but also represented this class and type. He smiled while saying, "He can't give this honor to others, so let's call it the Roland, the first battleship of the Roland class." In a secret room, Tassa and his intelligence department were studying the latest information. The intelligence they collected wrote that the royal capital had dispatched a fleet of 500 people to block the Crimson Water River, including 4 warships and 200 fully armed guards. They believed that Timothy intended to block the trade route and cut off the supply of materials to the western region. Tassa was somewhat heavy-hearted. This was not good news. This message had to be reported to His Highness immediately. Just then, the sound of wings flapping came from the garden. A white falcon darted into the room. It was a message from His Highness. Tassa took off the note, unfolded it, and quickly scanned the contents of the secret message. His heart gave a violent thump. Then, he couldn't help but laugh. Although he knew that as an intelligence officer, he shouldn't let his expression show, the news was too surprising and he couldn't suppress the joy in his heart. Tassa told his subordinates that they didn't have to worry about this matter anymore. His Highness was going to solve this problem from its roots very soon. Everyone was a bit puzzled, wondering what Tassa meant by solving the problem from its roots. Tassa clenched his fist, telling everyone that His Highness's first army and the fleet have already set off, and their target is the royal capital. The moment to dethrone Timothy has arrived.